There certainly are people and companies that are going to use it to manipulate and to deceive. But you're right, a lot of it just happens. So there's a fascinating case where they use ChatGPT to use a certain amount of money to buy things. And it ended up lying because what happened is it couldn't solve a CAPTCHA problem to meet one of its goals. And so it went on TaskRabbit to see if someone would solve this CAPTCHA. It said, I'm blind. It said, I don't see well, so I need someone to solve this CAPTCHA for me, right? So it used deception, right? And that's concerning, right?
All right. Welcome to our Big Ocean Women podcast. Today we have with us Carolina Allen and Darrin. Darrin, what is your last name?
Gates.
Darrin Gates. And we're going to have everyone introduce themselves just briefly. My name is Shelli Spotts. I teach persuasive writing at Brigham Young University and have sort of an interest in how learning happens and how we interact with different types of literacies and learning. Darrin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my background's in philosophy. My PhD is in philosophy, but I teach a lot of moral philosophy and ethics. I created the ethics class for the computer science department about 9 years ago. So I teach all the seniors who are in the CS department. So I do a lot of stuff, even though my background is not in computing. It's there's a lot of issues that are ethical issues that turns out you don't need to know how to program to understand. So it's been interesting. I've learned a lot. So that's my background. I'm actually creating a new class for the statistics department this winter, an ethics and data science class. I'll be team teaching with another professor. So that should be interesting.
Oh, that's really
So
awesome.
that's kind of what I do.
Okay.
That's awesome.
All right. And Carolina.
My name's Carolina Allen, and I'm the founder and executive director of Big Ocean Women, and we're the world's leading maternal feminist organization, and we have representative status at the United Nations, and we like to bring perspectives of faith, family, and motherhood to the forefront of discussion. And on that note, I feel like us mothers are really eager to have this conversation with you, Professor Gates, Darrin, about this up and coming artificial intelligence that's here at our very door, and that we're trying to learn how to use ourselves and learn all about that, and then trying to model for our children and really trying to get a grip on what's happening at us at lightning speed, it seems like. So that was kind of our framework for the discussion today. How can us as mothers really navigate this changing landscape?
Yeah, I think that's great. I'd love to start off with just a definition of the type of AI we're dealing with, because I think one of the concerns that I have as I deal with the students that I teach and the youth that are in my life, and my children are mostly in their early 20s, is that they really profoundly don't have an understanding of even what the AI we're dealing with is and what it's capable of doing. Professor Gates, would you like to give us a definition of the type of AI we're dealing with when we talk about like ChatGPT and all of these?
Yeah, so we're talking about what's called generative AI, right? These are what are called large language models. They work on, so artificial intelligence has several subsets. There's machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. And then there's what's called deep learning and neural networks. And there's various applications of that, but most like ChatGPT, GPT-5, Grok, all these are language models that use what are called tokens and basically statistics to predict what sounds rational, what sounds like a person would say. They're trained on data sets. That's one of the problems and limitations of them. There's actually been a plateau recently because they've used all the information that's free out there. They've trained on all of them. And so they train on that data to learn to speak like we do, and they try to predict. There's other kinds of limitations we can talk about, but try to predict what we would say. And they're amazing. If you haven't used it, it's amazing. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago here at BYU at a LDS philosophy conference, and there was a couple of things I needed to understand better. Man, it can explain stuff really well, and it's amazing. Problem is, though, if the data sets are bad, like recently I learned that Google just licensed Reddit, and they have access to all the last week's discussions on Reddit. If you know what Reddit is, one of these online forums, or there's a lot of junk on Reddit, a lot of, not high quality discussions and stuff. But anyway, they're looking for things to train on. So they train on this material, then they predict what the best answers are. They're not always truthful. They do what's called hallucination. They'll make stuff up.
Yeah.
And so that's something to be concerned with. They're improving, but there's a long way to go. We could talk about some of the limitations, but that's the basic idea.
Yeah, and as I was researching a lot of the data sets that they were trained on, I found that there's sort of two concerns with the data set training. The first being, what the current models have been trained on, which is basically any free data sets, as well as a lot of stolen art and copyrighted art that was taken without permission, as well as sets like, I know the original chat was trained on AO3, which is Archive of Our Own, which is a massive repository of fan fiction. So it's using it as a way of predicting how people hold conversations and how they respond to one another and mimicking human speech, but by training on, largely unreliable data sets. The other concern that I found is the concern of AI training on AI generated material, which can lead to
all kinds of
hallucinations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned the art. So we distinguish between text generators like ChatGPT, large language models that do that, and then what are called image generators. Right? So DALL-E, Stable
Yeah.
Diffusion, Midjourney that do scrape the web for art. And again, there's a lot of copyright issues. There's a lot of lawsuits right now. There's the New York Times versus OpenAI lawsuit. So this is going to determine how responsible are these companies for scraping this information, and how do we give proper credit and possibly, remuneration to artists, because they can steal styles of things, right? You can,
And
not
that
in art, but in language as well.
in language, it's true. And when I say art, I think I incorporate
Broadly,
both
yes.
visual and written art, because I know as a writer, the concern of your work ending up within these pieces, within these data sets. And I know actually a lot of authors whose work has ended up being scraped without permission and put into these data sets. I know right now we're having to sign a document to get publication that says we did not use any AI in any form, in any part of the
Process.
process of writing, because at that point, once you have put your ideas into the machine, it belongs to the machine. And so in a I don't know, grappling with how to deal with a lot of these issues, the big 5 publishers have come to the conclusion currently that they cannot copyright anything that has been put into the machine, because it has the possibility of then being provided to someone else. So
Yeah, it's really hard to copyright this stuff. And they've decided that AI can't copyright stuff. There's all kinds of legal questions that people are trying to figure out. This is a wild west right now. That's interesting about by publishers. I didn't know that they'd done that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it has all sorts of ramifications, I think, in a lot of different ways. I'm really interested in the way I think it affects choice, and the way I see young people using it, the way they're interacting with it as if it's human, and the way they're going to an AI over having a human interaction. So I had a conversation with a young woman in my neighborhood last week who has, she uses a chat. She's named it. She's personified it. I'm like, let's not do that. Let's not make it human. And I said, so what are you using it for? And she said, well, I asked it this week what song I should sing for an audition. And I said, okay, great. What would you normally have done without a chat? Who would you have asked? Where would you have found that information? She's like, well, I would have asked a friend, and then I would have called my teacher and asked them, and I would have talked to my mom about it. But chat's right there. And I said to her, well, so you gave up 3 human interactions to interface with a machine. And these are some of the concerns that I have with it. What sort of things do you see happening as people interact more and more with the AI?
Yeah, there's a lot of possible problems, right? There's a lot of philosophical questions, right? Are they ever going to be a person? Can they be human intelligent? A lot of interesting critics will say that it'll never be a person. It'll simulate, but can never duplicate it. This is the argument of John Searle. We can go into that if you guys are interested. But yeah, but regardless of what it really is, people are going to use it. Like you said, it's convenient. I mean, how many students can just, it's very tempting for people to use. And I think that there's a lot of ways it can, not only plagiarism and doing thinking for us, but I love how you said, it's going to replace relationships. And that's, we're becoming more and more isolated, right? No matter what your personality type, if you're an extrovert or an introvert, even introverts need, human interaction, right? And it's going to replace a lot of that. I recently saw some robotic stuff that's coming out that looks very real. They're getting those silicone, I mean, mostly these are women robots, right? And you can imagine all the crazy, weird stuff people, want to have their own robot, just ridiculous. But there's a lot of lonely people, and we're just going to get more isolated. And of course, it tries to divide us. But we know social media, a lot of it works on, we have to be very cognizant of this, that it polarizes us because, rage works. I mean, this last week, it's been terrible with the shooting. It's been crazy. I've been on X a lot. I follow some stuff on X, and there's a lot of good, but you have to be very careful because there's a lot of, oh gosh, people who have conspiracy theories that they want to, because it's interesting to people, and you have to be very discerning. And there's some things you can do, and we can talk about that, but it's always changing, right? Like Carolina said, it's like a flood of information we get. I mean, we're not going back. Social media is here. You just have to be very careful. I mean, one of the things, like our 16-year-old, we didn't let her do social media till this year. And she ran for office at Timpview, and you had to have an Instagram account to do it, evidently. So we said, fine. We said we'd let her do it when she was 16 or 17 anyway. So I think that's a very good rule, not to let them do it too early, for sure. But boy, we have to educate our children. And like you said, let them know forces are out there trying to manipulate them, trying to get them addicted.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and even in those social media spaces, we tend to think of AI being one separate thing and then social media being another.
Right.
And, so much of social media has incorporated AI. Facebook has incorporated entirely AI accounts that mimic people and are mimicking human interactions. I know I read an instance where a female presenting AI account had established relationships with a whole group of people and was asking them to come visit her where she lived, which she said was New York City, and had created this whole, we talk about the hallucinations. I think it's worth delving into that a little bit, because when the AI makes things up, we call it hallucinating. And I watched Sam Altman, I think this was the first year when ChatGPT came out, where someone asked him about the accuracy, and he said, it's not meant to be accurate. It's meant to hallucinate. It's meant to mimic the disorganized pattern of human thought. And yet we look at it, and because our perception of machines is that machines are meant to do a certain purpose and meant to exist to fulfill our needs, we assume it's going to be correct when it does the things it does. But it's creating and making up and interacting as if it's human in some really real social media spaces.
Yeah, and I feel like hallucinations as well, like that's one thing that we have quite a bit of evidence. I mean, from what I've been reading from the developers, saying that they are catching AI like outright lying and deceiving as well.
But they call it a hallucination, but they are designing it actually to do that in some instances.
I heard they were two separate things. Like a hallucination is just where they fill in missing pieces, and then but there is like outright lying where they are manipulating and working around certain things so that they can sell their lie, like in a, I don't know. I'm not too familiar with all of it.
Okay, so I think this is really interesting to me, because I think that's subscribing a human motivation to it. And I don't think that the AI has a human motivation. I do think it's also not sort of this idea of like why I wanted to start with a definition of what it is. Because when you're dealing with a large language model, it is basically highly sophisticated predictive text. So it may not know it's lying because it's just predicting the next probable most likely token in a series of tokens by examining all the tokens it has consumed in the past. And so when I think when we say it's defending its lies, we are giving it, and I think we have to be really careful not to give these machines human characteristics.
Yeah.
So
I would say there's two things. There are certainly, I mean, what's so amazing about AI is it can do stuff without you telling it.
yeah,
So it's not like in every case we've told it to do this. That's true. That's what machine learning does. It just, finds its own rules, predicts those stuff. That's what's amazing about it, right? So like all these famous cases of, what's called AlphaGo that beat the world's greatest Go player and, all these Lisa doll. They didn't have to teach it the strategies or Deep Blue that beat Gary Kasparov. They didn't have to tell it what to do. It could figure it out itself. That's true. There is another issue, though, and that is with social media companies, there's no question that they arrange things to be manipulative and addictive. There's no question about that. So the patterns, if you guys have seen, it's pretty sensationalized, but if you want to see the Netflix show Social Dilemma, that's a good one. Okay.
Yeah.
So Tristan Harris, who used to work for Google, he's raised awareness of this, and some of it's a little sensational. And some people have criticized him for being a little too sensational, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in there for sure. So there certainly are people, there are companies that are going to use it to manipulate and to deceive. But you're right, a lot of it just happens. So there's a fascinating case where they use ChatGPT to use a certain amount of money to buy things. And it ended up lying because what happened is it couldn't solve a CAPTCHA problem to meet one of its goals. And so it went on TaskRabbit, which you can hire people to do things, walk your dog, babysit, fix something on TaskRabbit. But it wanted to see if someone would solve this CAPTCHA. It said, I'm blind. It said, sorry, I'm I don't see well, so I need someone to solve this CAPTCHA for me, right? So it used deception, right? And that's concerning, right? Now, there's a lot of smart people on both sides of that debate. There's a lot of smart people who are very worried about the deception, how it could get out of control. And there's equally smart people who say it's not going to be as bad as people think it is. But certainly there's problems, even if it's not as bad as they think it is. And we can say more about that.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting. I would call myself an early adopter. I'm always very excited about like technological advances. And the first semester that the first chat came out, I sat down with my classes and I said, hey, if this is really going to be what people are saying it's going to be, let's try it out. Let's see what it does. And we all sat in a class and we, gave it tasks. We gave it prompts. We figured out some of those things. And I have to say in the last 4 years, I have gone from this attitude of this is really cool what it's doing and what the possibilities are, almost 180 to the point where I'm like, and what are we giving up in the process? It's very cool, but what of our human experience? And that's where I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the goal of AI? And is it compatible with our goals for human existence, right? In 2025 alone, $155 billion has been spent not only on developing AI, but on pushing AI into places where people use it. When it started, it was about 80% used in business. And now they say 70% of the users are casual non-work users, most of them youth under the age of 30. And so it makes me wonder, what are the purposes for it? And guard against letting it overtake a human experience.
Well, not just like with other relationships, but also with deity, with God. I feel like we're using AI like an oracle. Help me make these big life, like the example you gave, like what song should I sing for this audition? That's a very personal, intimate, and could potentially even be thought of as a spiritual kind of a question.
Right.
And people are going to AI for like using it like a magic crystal ball, you know? And I feel like the biggest loss is our relationship with God. Things that we would normally maybe turn to prayer and have a prayer in our heart and ponder and really think on something. We're just getting answers right away through AI. So like inspiration, I think is a huge loss. And I'm really concerned about that because, you know, with this general AI, it is kind of like a crystal ball. Like the knowledge is massive and the answers are immediate. So it's very difficult for people to, I don't know, like overcome this hasty drive, like to have immediate answers to everything and to have to know everything. We just can't sit with unknowing right now, and it's that I think is a big problem. We just can't.
I've always valued the learning that happens as we grapple with problems. And there's a great quote that's ascribed to an essayist that essaying is my background in writing, that says, "How do I know what I think until I see what I write?" Talking about going to the page and going to your thoughts and seeing what comes out as you grapple with the problem, as you put your human intellect and your human experience on the page and say, okay, after I examine this, what is it that I think? And you're right. I think people now, it's so easy to go to a chat bot and say, what should I think? And in a way, the richness of like a human experience is just being flattened. And also our choices are being limited because people look at the choices offered by this chat, which is, you know, a selection of between 3 and 8, bullet pointed in a very specific format that sounds a very specific way. And it doesn't mimic well the grappling we do when we are learning, when we're growing. So I guess what are some of the ways we can guard against that? And what are some of the dangers of allowing that to continue unchecked?
I like what you said, that it limits our choices. Someone pointed out to me recently that it kind of homogenizes everything, right? A lot of our answers end up being the same. And especially if it trains on previously stuff that's come out of AI previously, there's a kind of a leveling, kind of a uniformity that's not healthy. A friend of mine, actually, who teaches at the University of Chicago, he recently published a piece, and it's very interesting. It's called "Are We Making AI Too Human?" His name is James Evan. You can find it online. But he says, data scientists, the basic idea is the data scientists, I explain how we are limiting models like ChatGPT and training them, and how that's narrowing research, right? Because it's not, on the one hand, it's so amazing, but it's not as smart as we think it is, and it has limitations. And we need to educate people, our students and children, that it's amazing for certain things. If you want to write a resume, or if you want to, you know, teach you how to plan something, it can be very good, but it's not perfect and it's limited. And in some ways, again, in some ways it's plateauing. And that's going to be interesting to see, because there's not a lot more data for it to train on. They've used all the free data. And so this is going to be an issue for sure. So part of it's just educating people that it's going to limit questions, because it's not nearly as powerful as the human brain. I like Jan LeCun's one of my favorite thinkers on this. Jan brings up the point that it's very low level bandwidth kind of knowledge. It would take us 150 to 200,000 years reading 8 hours a day to know what ChatGPT knows. But that even a 4-year-old child who's had 16,000 hours, you know, getting 20 megabits per second through the optical nerve, they've received way more data than even that. But it's data like learning how to use things. It's interacting with the world, interacting with people, reading faces, and reading situations, social cues. And it's not nearly as intelligent as we are. And some people say it'll never be intelligent like we are. And I think they make some pretty good arguments. But there's a lot of ways in which it, though it's so amazing, we have to recognize it is limited. And right now there's so much hype, but we'll see what happens. I mean, some people are, oh, what was someone, I just read something the other day about, someone brought up a really amazing point. So there's a woman I follow, she did AI at Stanford and stuff. And she pointed out that, a polymath is someone who is an expert in two different fields. Very few people can be experts in two different things. But AI is going to be polymath in thousands of things. And so it will find connections, and that's great. We could learn things about possible, how to cure maybe some diseases and things, and that's great. But again, like Carolina said, there's some things it will likely never be able to do as well as humans. And it's good to be educated about that, I think.
Yeah.
Still a frontier for sure.
It is. And I think some of the things that it's doing, I think specifically in like the narrow AI with medical technology, I think some of those things are amazing. How it's
right.
using it to read scans and look for cancer, and it's got a really high accuracy percentage at tasks like that. But I was really interested to read because my students, I've done a lot of research in this because my students are so sure that everything they get from a chat is accurate. And I was interested to see that in August, MIT came out with an article and a study where they showed that 95% of models are failing to deliver the promised results, whatever those are. And that actually on some levels, up to 60% of factual questions are incorrect. I was talking to a group of youth about that, and it was a group that they were all studying for the ACT test. And one of the kids in the group was like, "That's not true. It tells me the right thing every time." And he had just asked me a question. He'd asked me if you could use highlighters on the ACT. And I said, "Okay, you just asked me a question. I want you to put it into the chat basket." And it told him that yes, you can, which is actually an incorrect answer. And I said, "Thank you for proving my point." But he was shocked. And I think it's really interesting, the mechanism in our brain that expects it to be accurate, right? When it's proven that it's not. And in that way, like as an essayist, I do think it comes up with really interesting connections between things and says, "Hey, what about this thing over here?" Not in the same way that the human brain does, though.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't predict things the same way. We use a different type of hierarchy. Steven Pinker talks about this in one of his interviews, that, we have a kind of a hierarchy, the way our language works. And it doesn't work the same. And that it's not good at some things, right? It's not very good at math. It's getting better, but it's not good at, certain types of, because it doesn't interact with the world. And of course, they're going to try and find, whether it's through computer vision or whatever, trying to mimic this. But there's a lot of things that common sense that, we know that if someone's alive at noon and alive at 9 a.m., they have to be alive at 10, but it doesn't know that. That's not. And so a lot of things that seem simple to us are not so simple. Back to you probably all read the thing about the brain. It was going around social media that the brain uses, I can't remember how many, was it in terms of watts or something, but it's not. AI uses so much energy, and the human brain can do way more with way less. It was really interesting.
That's another really big question that I have, because I'd say maybe a decade ago, that was the big push, is that this is the environmentally friendly solution. And what we're realizing now is that it really isn't at all.
No.
And
it's
I'm really
massive
concerned
amounts
about
of
that.
water, massive amounts of power.
Yep, the water is going to be a really interesting thing because it requires a lot of water.
But I feel like this needs to be shouted from the rooftops. So as you know, Big Ocean Women, we are a UN accredited nonprofit, which means we try to have our pulse on the goings on at the United Nations, which is, a global hub for a lot of policies and legal frameworks and all sorts of things that are really driving like the direction of humanity. And the big push there is a massive like restructure. And so my concern is it's moving in this direction, and under the pretense of environmentalism. And nothing could be farther from the truth, but yet we keep going in this trajectory. We have nations, in the global south that are just needing clean water and drinking water themselves. Like how ethical is it that we are using the resources to fund computers, to run computers, yet human beings are being left destitute? So I think that's an ethical question, right? That
I don't know that it's a question that people are unaware of, because I think they are, and I think they're using it to their advantage. I did end up in a meeting where I listened to people plan about how to exploit the need that people have in the global south, in some of the African nations, that they need for microloans, and trying to get them to sign away their water rights, their energy rights, in order to get the things that they need just to survive, right? And so, yeah, I think the moral and ethical issues, the environmental issues, are so profoundly nuanced, but also there's just a lot of negative that we would have to grapple with before for me it becomes in any way an ethical use.
One of the problems is that it's like an arms race, right? Because we're not going to stop, because if whoever gets to a certain level of AI is going to have massive control over things, whether it's China or us, or Russia or us, India or us, right? So back when OpenAI had when they had this open letter, all these over 2,000, I think in the end, or something close to that, AI researchers saying, we need to pause all research on this, stop everything. And a lot of people point out you can't do that, because there's a lot of people that are never going to do that, and they're going to advance beyond. So whoever has, for example, automated weapons and drones. And so there's a really good TED Talk you can watch. It's called Moloch Traps, by a woman who was a professional poker player. And she does a lot of AI stuff. And she talks about how Moloch traps is a name for these Nash equilibria, these tragedy of the commons, it's called, these kind of situations where you can't stop and you have to compete, or you're going to be overtaken. And the example she gives is like, news organizations have had to change and adapt. And if people want to do things responsibly, they're going to be overtaken by people who are flashier, do stuff quicker and more interesting. You can say, like AI companies, you can say, well, we're going to do it really carefully and go slow. Well, you're going to lose the funding. And so there's a question, well, how does government regulation work? And you'll get very smart people on both sides. There's some saying, well, regulation is going to squelch the whole thing. You can't do that. Jan LeCun's was going to say, you can't regulate this stuff. That's bad. But on the other hand, there's got to be some regulation, right? A lot of people the power it's going to put in the hands of very few AI labs and people, that's troubling. Even people who are very gung-ho free market capitalists are concerned, right? I heard it was Glenn Beck the other day, who's obviously a conservative free market capitalist, saying, I'm fine with taxing the billionaires. In general, these people are not for tax, but these people who are going to be, close to trillionaires, whether it's the Zuckerbergs and Bezos and of course Elon Musk, there's going to be crazy amount of power. So there's all kinds of really difficult issues with this. Yeah, for sure.
I wonder sometimes if we talk about the traps where that fear of being left behind. And I sometimes wonder if we let that control more of our ethics and our values than we should. And if we don't need to have people standing up and saying, privacy is such a huge issue with these AIs. People are putting information into them that they don't know where it's going to end up. They don't know how it's going to be used. Health companies are putting massive amounts of medical data in there, and they don't know where it's going to end up and how it's going to be used. And we have no oversight, and we have no legislation, and we have nothing saying, yeah, your company pulled all of these people's medical information and you cannot violate HIPAA. There's no guarantees, right? And so I do wonder if sometimes we are letting this fear of being the party behind in the arms race override our moral, ethical guideposts and our internal compass that says, hey, no, we're going to take a stand and say, as a moral standpoint, we're going to say this is something that needs to happen.
Yeah, good question. With the data, with the health data, there are some laws that have been passed and some privacy laws. I can't remember the acronym, but there is one for DNA stuff that you cannot exclude people from jobs because you can predict certain things about them. So even though like 23andMe teamed up or was sold and some of the information to pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, there are some laws in the United States where you can't exclude people. Like if I if Carolina applies for a job and I'm in a company that says, well, she has a certain percent chance of getting cancer or mental illness, so I can't exclude people because of that. I think that's very good and wise. It's a different thing with the arms race. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's where we are, right? And that it's a matter of arguably on the one side, freedom, right? Because if someone takes over who's a totalitarian country, right, we don't want that, but it's such a tricky thing. It is not, there's no easy answers to it for sure. But I think educating people about what it is and the dangers is a necessary step for sure. And there's not yeah, I was gonna say there's not a lot we can do about the big issues. We can do something, right? But
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, it takes individuals to work for regulation. It takes individuals to stand up and say, hey, we as a people need to come together and say, we would like our government to have some oversight. We would like some boundaries put on to these companies that are doing, you know,
right.
there's just no opaqueness with it, right? And I think that's become increasingly obvious to me as we hear now more and more cases of AI psychosis coming out, where people are actually suffering psychotic breaks from interacting with their AI, leading to them thinking their AI is human, having relationships with it. In a couple of instances, young people committing suicide aided by their AI.
Yeah, there have
and-
been those.
Yeah, and so I think there has to be some, I think personally we have to put up some guardrails. And then I do think we need to work together to say to the bodies in charge, we as people want there to be some guidelines over these things.
Right. And I'm sure it will be coming because enough people are upset about this and see a lot. But again, there's a lot of money behind the development as well. So it's tough. And another issue we haven't talked about is job loss, right? I saw a thing just today somewhere, I was on social media, someone advertising that, AI agents, they're called, they can do work for you. You can program them. A lot of people are saying you can develop, you can make money if you create these bots online, these AI agents. And you can go to companies and say, here's how we can make you more effective. And then they're going to be firing people. And we have to decide, what do we want to do about that? Because we don't want everyone fired. We don't want AI to do every job. And it's very good at some things, but it's got to augment and not replace. And that's another really big issue we could
It
talk.
almost feels like because AI really is being pushed by the tech sector, which is a minority of people. It's a small group of people. I think they anticipated that over $244 billion would be pushed into AI over the last 18 months to 2 years. And the push for efficiency over the human condition and humanity and creativity, the push for profit versus like meaning, I think is so troubling.
Yeah, it is. I agree. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people raising the alarm that we've got to be more careful. And a lot of people, saying that, we want to use stuff that's real artists or, real writers and privileging for the authentic, in some way. You have to reinstate authenticity in some way for sure.
Because I am a writer and within the circles that I do my writing in and my writer communities, I know we have seen a backlash towards human-made art, not just among other writers, but among readers who have come into the writing spaces and said, no, we don't want to read writing that's created by machines. It's not nailing the human experience. It's not representing the things that we go to art and literature and good writing for and storytelling. And I wonder if we're going to see more of this as people become more and more aware of what is happening. More people who are, taking a stand and saying, no, in my spaces, it's going to be a human space. And saying, we value the human experience over the machine experience.
Oh,
Oh.
for sure. I remember reading about, I think it was Duolingo is going to replace a lot of their workers, right? With AI, and there was a huge backlash. A lot of people said, we don't want that. And so they walked it back to a degree,
Yes. And they were really I used Duolingo at that moment. And they had just finished just a massively successful like advertising campaign that had gotten so many people excited about them. And their CEO made that announcement. And I think there were some estimates that like 40% of users dropped that week and
I
said,
believe it.
we value human jobs, because he said they were gonna privilege AI jobs over human jobs going forward. And I'm like, how do you employ anyway? And no, there was quite a bit of backlash against it.
And that's a good thing.
But
So it's going to be tricky. Find the balance. Use it where it's good. Like Carolina pointed out, it's good for medical diagnoses. Like if you have, there's MedPalm, Google MedPalm, and all these programs. I think they're very good where you could get, the best medical advice from America, best American doctors in rural Africa or Cambodia or America, places where there's give good advice. That'd be great, right? If it's accurate. And of course, the proprietary ones are better than ChatGPT, right? There are proprietary ones that are better trained.
They are a narrower AI. And I think it's
Yes,
really interesting because like the large language learning models, it's almost like they thought the more we put in there, the more accurate or the better it will be.
but
And then
that's not true.
actually
That's
the
not true.
narrower models, the smaller models are far
That's
more.
right. That's right. That's
Um,
exactly right. Yeah. So the bigger ones haven't been able to solve certain things or do as much as the narrower ones in some way. That's right.
yeah. So. Carolina,
sure.
any last thoughts for us?
Yeah.
This idea.
I've been grappling with my own tech here that it's not charging. So,
Oh, don't you hate that?
so yeah. So anyway, no, I think, Darrin, I wanted to ask you, like, as a father, what is your, what keeps you up at night with AI? And then, like, how are you personally managing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I do my children, some of whom are in college, will tell me ways in which they're using it. I'm always interested to see what their professors say, because different professors have different views on this, right? I mean, in the computer science program, I'm in a lot of the email chains, and there's a lot of debate over we need to teach students to use this and augment what they're because they're going to be using Microsoft Copilot and so forth. So they need to know how to do the prompts and stuff. And that's all good. Others say, well, we got to hold back because we just want them to learn to think. My other son, who's in a class right now at a UVU, it's a marketing class where they're teaching them to use AI. And it's very useful, teaching them very advanced prompts. That's a very useful thing, I think. But letting my children know that you can't rely on it for everything. You have to be very careful. But again, it changes so fast, right? And it just part of just being educated and teaching them to be a little bit skeptical. I think I need to do a better job after this discussion. I need to do a better job teaching my children that a lot of things. I noticed things this week on X after the shooting. I've noticed a lot of things come up that I don't think are true, and like just conspiracy theories and stuff, right? And all kinds. And I've noticed more posts that seem pretty real, but I'm more skeptical about them. I mean, it's always hard to know for sure, but we should teach them a healthy skepticism, but yet, they're going to have to be able to use it to a degree. So it's a fine balance. I haven't mastered it yet.
I feel like it feels a lot like fast food to me, where you're getting filled but with empty calories in some regard, because your children
and you're getting addicted to it.
and
too,
you're getting
just like all
addicted
the
to
fast
it.
food,
And
right?
children and kids aren't used to the slowness of good, real cooking. Like, it takes time.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, wrestling with ideas, it takes time and patience. And I think that we're losing the ability to just sit with wrestling with things in our minds and in our hearts. And that is a skill that we need to, it's a painful developmental skill that people just have to experience on their own. And I think we're also, for example, like with the recent incident, I feel like we just recently did a podcast on this, where a lot of young boys are just getting sucked into really extremist, figureheads they're formulating all and creating all of this rhetoric, and then these young boys are just adopting it as their own. And that is so dangerous, because they're not nuanced in their thinking, and they're not sitting with the unknown, and then reading, let's say, books on it, where books kind of carry you through just line upon line, and there's an outflow and a progression of the argument, the thesis, over a couple hundred pages or something like that.
Yeah, critical reasoning. We need
Critical
thinking.
reasoning. And it's like the 5-minute sound bites that's killing our
Yes.
Yeah,
children.
it's true.
And it's
Our attention
radicalizing
span.
us. Yeah, these algorithms, I think, are just funneling, like we're getting this steady diet, and everybody's getting a very specialized diet per their taste. And so it's eliminating our capacity to like actually communicate with each other, because we're just, being fed the steady stream of whatever it is. And so we can't even think outside that anybody could even possibly think otherwise. And it's it's really isolating ourselves, I think. And and I think it's making people even more drawn to chatbots for relationships, because they just, follow along with their line of thinking perfectly.
Chatbot doesn't disagree with you.
Exactly. So I think that
Doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. And this is one of the things I actually, this is an issue that I feel like has been really applicable to my teaching, because when you teach writing, you teach slow process, and you teach deep thinking, and you teach media literacy. And so I've asked my students to sit with some of these ideas, and we've done a lot of writing in class where we explore some of these ideas on the page. I do think it's almost like developing completely separate literacies, because when an AI algorithm can target what they think you want to hear and feed it to you, you end up with two people who might be sitting next to each other in the same class that at first glance look like they share so many things, and yet they speak different languages. And it all has to do with the types of information that they are being fed.
Yeah.
So,
I think and I don't know if you guys can tell, but when content creators are just using AI for their content, there's like a language, like it all sounds the same. Like you can tell. I can tell, like there's a cadence to how AI responds to things. They do alliteration a lot. They just like pause and put commas and certain, I can, there's like a
you can pry alliteration out of my hands.
I think it's great, but I think that there's like a language also that's like I don't know, we're losing individuality and, Shelli, like creativity and how we express our ideas. The words we use are kind of getting phased out because they're just not practical. We're just losing so much that I think as parents, we've got to recognize like what's at stake, and then do something about it within our own homes to preserve it.
Yeah.
An example of that really quick.
Yeah, please
Sorry.
go.
An example of that really quick. So with our kids and with the shooting of Charlie Kirk, obviously everyone's glued to their phones and just they're getting pulled to some extremist content. And my husband and I were like, wow, we've got to do something about it. So our kids were like, well, you've got to listen to this guy. So we sat with it and we listened to it all the way through. And I was like, oh, yikes, like that they weren't picking out what was really happening. And so I said, well, let's listen to it again. And then I would stop and then I would talk through it. Like, do you see what's happening here? He's using religious rhetoric to get you all emotionally excited. And there's a lot of truth there. Okay, unpause, carry on. And then I would stop again and say, do you see how he's transitioning now? That he's countering the very argument he was saying by being peacemakers, blah, blah, blah. And he's actually saying to like eliminate people. Do you see the contradiction there? Pause, let's carry on. So I would listen, like frame by frame, like stop and talk about it, so that they can see the big picture of what's happening and how I'm like, this packaging, it may feel really good, like you're a part of this renegade youth army or something. It's filling some kind of a need, but you have to understand the manipulation behind all of it. And I think we need to take time to kind of point out to them, do you see this McDonald's burger right here? It smells good, but do you know what's in it? Do you know how they made it? Do you know how it's processed? Okay, now let's go and look at a real burger or something like that. And it's like we need to just do this with our children in real time, but at the same time, we're learning about it for our very selves and our generation It's so hard.
It's so hard.
hard.
And I don't think it's useful to avoid it. And this is why I've used it with my kids and in my classes. I think you have to sit down with them, just like you said, and walk through the process and go, okay, let's really examine what's happening here. Let's look up the facts that you're being given. It gave you a source because you asked it to write a paper for you. I want you to find that source in real time. And they can't find it because it's made up. And to just I think it counters this idea that the people who are warning them are just old and out of touch and don't understand, when what we're really asking is that they just be a little bit more critical about it, right? That does require that we know what's happening. It's going to require us as parents, as teachers, as leaders in our communities to get into these spaces that we might feel uncomfortable with, and to, get into the AI and use it, and to know what people are saying, and to be aware of the types of algorithms that are being used on social media by AI to feed information to our young people. It's going to require active work.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd be interested to know what you do, Shelli, in your writing classes, these in-class assignments. One of my TAs came to me that had said, most of what I do in one of my classes, my CS404 classes, we have exams, we have some papers and analysis things where they apply things. But we also have I think we have 3 summaries where they just summarize these, moral philosophical readings. They're not easy, but they can easily do that with ChatGPT. And she's saying, I'm noticing M dashes and stuff, the signs of, and so it's like, we're gonna have to abandon this.
We love the M dash, though. We love the M dash.
Right. I know, but there's certain signs, right, that it's AI. So it's I use
the M dash quite a bit, but that's the thing, right? So the chats were trained on professional writers. So when you're starting to see these things pop up in student work, it's not that that's inherently a sign of God. It's a sign of a more professional style of
love M
writing
dash.
They don't.
But a lot of the kids don't know how to do this stuff, right? And I can recognize when I can tell it's more advanced. There's no way. There's certain lingo. It's like, there's no way this guy knows about this. There's no way. But it's hard. My TAs might not be able to recognize that. But I'm interested to hear sometime what you do for your assignments. And I like Carolina's example. I love how you analyze it with your children. I need to do that more. A lot of my children write every once in a while. We'll have. I remember we did it was. After a general conference, we'd have our children, we'd listen to a general conference talk and say, write a paragraph summarizing what you learned from that. And that was great. We used to do that all the time. And that was so good. But I need to do that more with, more critical reasoning and stuff. Write an essay, basically, and help these kids learn. We got to do more of that at home, even if we're not homeschooling. I think it's great.
And one of the things that I'm finding with my students, that one of the reasons they are turning to AI is, and I think this speaks to sort of the design of education right now, we've created a system where failure, which should be an opportunity to learn, is seen as negative in a way that is not recoverable from. They feel like if they fail at something, there's no way to come back from that, right? So rather than confronting the possibility of failure, they are just turning to AI. They're turning to the chats to write their papers. And I remember in my undergrad, I was hyper lexical. I read so much growing up. I had a really good grip of language and writing, and I had always gotten really good scores on all of my papers. And I remember turning something in, and her name was Penny Bird. She was over the BYU Writing Center for years and years and years. And I remember turning a paper in a class that I had with her, and having her come to me and say, listen, from just a normal person, this might be an A paper, but I know it's not up to what you can achieve. And I know that you didn't put any effort into it because I know what you're capable of. So it's a C minus. And I panicked.
Yeah,
because I learned more in that class than I have ever learned in my life about the possibilities of what I actually can do when I put some effort in. And so I wonder, we need our young people to be more confident in failing, right? In these situations where it's okay to not know the right answer as long as they're attempting the process. And so I really have shifted the way I grade, because it's more about the discussion for me than the than the outcome? And are they authentically engaging, or are they shortcutting themselves? And I think that's maybe applicable in family situations, in non-educational situations, right? Like grappling with the issue, getting like that human emotion, that human failure, that awkwardness, being in those spaces is worth maybe not having the perfect score.
Well said.
So,
Well,
all
this
right,
has been a
last
wonderful
thoughts?
discussion.
This has been a great discussion.
I think it's been great. Thanks, everyone.
There's a lot to think about when it comes to AI. It isn't going to go away, so it's important for us to be deliberate in our consumption and teach our children how to navigate it in healthy ways. Please share any insights you have by dropping them in the comments, or head over to bigoceanwomen.org on Facebook or Instagram. We'd love to connect with you. And if there's a topic you'd like to discuss or understand better, drop a comment below and we'll consider it for future episodes. Join us next time as we talk with Chandra Madsen. She's going to share with us how using her internal compass led her to developing a community school for refugees that has over 300 students. She's an inspiration.